Welcome everybody to DMG events, the Transport Evolution. My name is Jeff Blackbeard. I'm the Moore Global Director for Sectors and Markets. I have pleasure today to be a moderator on this particular session, and I have Alexa-Rae Hicks with me from Moore Global, based in Johannesburg, Cathie Lewis from Earth Energy, also based in South Africa, on this panel with me. I'm going to be giving them a better introduction, but I really wanted to set the scene for what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about ESG in the transport and logistics market. As you are well aware, this is a challenging topic for us at this particular time. Alexa, you're an environmental lawyer working in the ESG sector group. Please just give us a short intro about yourself and the role that you play at Moore Global.
Thank you very much, Jeff. Yes, so I am an environmental and mining attorney specialist. That is my background. I work at the Moore Johannesburg office, but currently working as the project manager for the Moore Global ESG rollout. What that means is that Moore Global, which has 157 network firms, is looking to have an ESG rollout throughout the entire network. Now, a lot of people might not know what ESG means, so let's just make sure. E, environmental, S, social, and G, governance. So what are we looking at doing is we're looking at trying to bring awareness to the ESG understanding. We're trying to bring awareness to what the regulations are, international law and local laws that affect both South Africa, Mozambique, as well as the EU, because what we need to understand is exactly what's happening internationally, as that will affect a lot of the different industries, and in particular, the sector of transport itself.
Thanks, Alexa. Really good to have you with us. And Cathie Lewis, Cathie I've known for a number of years now in different roles. Cathie, originally, I met you when you were company secretary at Grindrod and wrestling in a corporate environment with sustainability and the frameworks, and now working with Earth Energy in an advisory role. Really quite exciting times for you, Cathie. Do you want to just bring us up to steam with your thoughts on that transition, and particularly around sustainability? And I know your very favorite topic around water management also is on your agenda.
Thank you, Jeff, and lovely to be here with you and Alexa. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Yes, indeed, sustainability is definitely gaining a lot of traction. And if you just take media articles as a proxy of understanding how this is developing, you will see, you can read any weekly publication or daily news, and you will see there will be a wide variety of sustainability topics covered. Sustainability and ESG, I always say it's like the study of life. But if you want to now specify what are key things that people should be looking at, I would say climate change, as we know, is the biggest risk that we are facing, and it's a systemic risk. So that means there isn't really one aspect of our life, both the human systems as well as the ecological systems, which are not impacted by climate change. I read a recent article this morning, and 90% of the companies surveyed said either one or more of their assets have been impacted by physical climate change already. So it means it's not a risk that is to happen, it's already happening, and it's just the extent that we are not certain about. So climate change is obviously traditionally thought of as part of the E in ESG. But as I said, because it's a systemic risk, it's becoming part of the S and the G as well. So social, where you've got huge impacts of people, you've got climate migrants, you've got floods. We saw what happened in Mozambique recently, heartbreaking to see what happens. And then the G. And I'm sure Alexa will give us a little bit more about the frameworks that are happening, all the exciting stuff that's happening in the EU, South Africa, America, New Zealand, and specifically driven by the TCFD, the Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosure. From a practical point of view, if companies are wondering where to start, how to do this, the TCFD is such an elegant, strong methodology, and it's international best practice. And the 4 core pillars are governance, strategy, risk management, and metrics and targets. And I use it for everything, irrespective of what it relates to, because it's a universal methodology. Yes, it is focused on climate change, but you can use it equally well for ESG or for anything else in your company. So I really recommend companies getting comfortable with the TCFD framework. Thank you.
Thanks, Cathie, for bringing us up to date with your position and insights. I'm really keen to dive a little bit more into some of your experience. And I think particularly the topic of ESG is quite broad, but maybe we can just give it some context around, an example for the sector. And I know you've had a lot of working within the mining sector, which relates to the transportation of heavy resources. Maybe just give us a bit of insight. What does it practically mean? What does ESG mean for mining, for instance?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. If you consider ESG within the mining space, then I would suggest from a practical point of view that companies should start off with understanding what are the material issues facing their businesses. And that could also include their risks and opportunities, but as you know, it's not necessarily the same thing. So that's a good place to start, is to understand what are the drivers of your business, what are the things that you should be looking out for now, but also importantly, you've got to understand long-term thinking. And that is where scenario planning and the whole TCFD thinking assists greatly with understanding that you need to comprehend what will happen in 2030 and in 2050. Very practical example, in the mining space, we understand that extreme weather events the frequency and the volatility will increase. So say, for example, you have a tailing storage facility. These facilities are designed now, but it will have a very long-term lifespan. Understanding how the climate will change in that specific area will assist you in adjusting your design, your management, your mine closure. Because say, for example, you're in an area where you will have increased floods or increased storms. Will you know that your stability will still be sufficient so that you don't have a failure? Or will you experience increased droughts, which will then again impact your stability of your tailings facility wall, which could also create a failure? And these things are very important. So it means that you have to incorporate climate change impacts into your development, the whole life cycle of your facilities, including your water infrastructure, to make sure that you've considered the possible impacts from a long-term perspective. I hope that's been helpful.
Fantastic. Thanks, Cathie. Alexa, I mean, you've also had a lot of experience in the mining, but also in the transport related sectors. Do you have any thoughts, ideas stemming from what Cathie was covering?
Yes, and thank you, Cathie. I mean, that provides us a lot of information in terms of understanding, particularly from a sector perspective, what needs to be done. And in terms of those long-term thinking, the type of frameworks, regulations, and legislation that gets put in place into certain countries and sectors are trying to assist to make sure that these long-term events that are going to unfortunately happen, that we can try and do something today to stop it in the future. An example is, as we talk about sustainability, the Mozambican legislation on environment talks about sustainable development through an acceptable and realistic compromise between the country's socioeconomic development and environmental protection. So from a transport perspective, we understand that the change from coal and the change from certain non-renewable resources in terms of, let's say, from mine transport or transport in general might be very difficult for the transport company to adjust. We have to understand that the frameworks and legislation put in place also internationally are trying to look at this long-term ideology, because what we do now is not going to necessarily make an impact right now. It's going to make an impact in 20 years, 30 years, 50 years. And that is where the frameworks internationally that we are seeing are also looking at making sure that the type of reporting, the type of information, the type of skill set that people are given internally in companies equip them to understand that they have to start doing things now. They have to look at what they're doing now, as Cathie said, because it's going to happen in the future. So we see that there is a big change to go to net zero, as a lot of people have said, but we also have to understand that in certain sectors, such as the transport sector, it's not going to be an immediate change. There's going to have to be certain steps taken, and the most important part is raising awareness here so that companies start to understand what those legal requirements are and how to start implementing them in order to make sure that we have a sustainable future for our children.
If I may interject for a second, Jeff. Alexa, thank you so much. That's been so helpful and insightful. And as you were talking, it sprung to mind, the risks are not just the physical risk, but also the transitionary risks. And a big part of the transitionary risk would be your legislative and policy risk. And that links nicely to your frameworks. Now, we all know COP26 occurred in December in Glasgow, Scotland. And there was a huge drive towards these net zero targets that you were referring to. That on the one hand, and also what is great is that the time period for countries to update their NDCs, their nationally determined contributions, i.e. that's their plan, how they will reduce their carbon footprint, has now been reduced from 5 years to 1 year. So that means annually, countries are now updating and making their NDCs more stringent. If you make a commitment like this, and if you've signed the Paris Agreement, it means it needs to be translated into legislation in some way. And that, again, talks to your frameworks and your policy changes. So from a transport perspective, companies also need to be mindful that legislation is going to place a burden on them. And like in South Africa, we are seeing that there are going to be carbon budgets for certain high-emitting industries. And systematically, that's going to roll out to all industries. So it might not happen today. It might not happen tomorrow or next year, but it's definitely coming. That, for sure, is going to happen. The only question is, what is the time period? And from the stuff that I'm reading, I can see that there's an accelerated pace. If you read, for example, the International Energy Agency's Energy Outlook or BP's Outlook. 5 years ago, the outlook was vastly different to what it is now, and no one saw this coming. So personally, I'm quite excited to see this, the movement in the space. And I think companies need to be mindful that they need to act sooner than later. Thank you.
So, Cathie, thank you so much. That reference to COP26 is also quite an important aspect of why we are here to make a statement regarding sustainability, is because at COP26, the International Sustainability Standards Board was actually implemented. And what that means is that there are going to become international regulations that require reporting on sustainable issues. And we are hoping to see a draft of those by July 23. But what that means is that if you are required to have an audit under IFRS, or if you're required to IFRS for SME, those requirements that are going to come out from the ISSB are going to have to be implemented within your company. So if you're not aware of what's happening now and you try and submit your assurance papers later on with your audit, there's going to be non-compliance, and that's going to be at an international level. So I agree with you. There's a lot of things that we have to look at legislation as things change, and you have to make sure that within your company, you have someone who's keeping an eye on these changes. Or you make sure that you have a professional service hired to assist you through these transitions, through these risks, and through these processes.
Cathie, Alexa, this has been very, very interesting. It's a topic that could keep us busy for many more hours, minutes that we have available to us on this session. I'd like to just kind of pull a few thoughts together, even though it's very important about the frameworks, making sure that we get the compliance really important for funding in the future and the longer term view. But there's also the social piece in the ESG. It's all about our people. It's a sustainable planet so that we can live more sustainably as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Another thing that I want to add is we must also be mindful of, as you were saying, people. I mean, people is the most important thing here, and we need to live in harmony with one another. And especially considering my experience in the freight and transport industry, which has been traditionally male orientated. Also in my previous employment in a steel company, I mean, I was often the only woman in a meeting. So diversity and inclusion and equity, these are core concepts. And it's not just a feel-good concept. Research has shown over and over again that when a company embraces it for the right reason, it shows on the bottom line. So it's not just a good thing to do, but it makes a lot of business sense to have proper inclusion of diversity and gender representation.
There's going to have to be some tough decisions in the transport sector around the fuel you use, the type of mobility that you implement, considerations about technology, even the discussions around the minerals that we draw out of the ground are going to be on the radar for the next 20 to 30 years. And it's not an easy answer. There's some transition decisions to take, and those are going to be really important in the boardroom, and they're going to be really important from some of the funding. So I really appreciate both of your time here, Alexa from Moore Global, Cathie from Earth Energy, and I look forward to the further discussions that will take place, hopefully based on the insights that you've provided today. Thank you very much.